also like to start with thanking IFSS for giving me this opportunity to talk to you and to discuss, hopefully afterwards, on this very interesting topic of progesterone. So, new progesterone role in human reproduction. Just trying to move, next slide, to conflict of interests. So progesterone, if you look at the natural menstrual cycle, it's clear to see what phase of the cycle we're talking about. So progesterone is the hormone of the luteal phase. So this is something we'll talk about most of this talk, but it's also quite interesting that more and more we get interested in how progesterone can be applied and used in the follicular phase. This is the second part of my talk. And finally, I will also discuss how progesterone actually also plays a role in ovulation, and where we also could explore opportunities for the progesterone hormone in our daily clinical practice as a method for ovulation triggering. So let us first have a look at the conventional role of progesterone in the luteal phase. What is progesterone doing? Progesterone is doing a whole lot of things. It works on implantation in many different ways. The most obvious one is a transformation of the endometrium to a secretory endometrium, so which is basically ready for implantation. So this causes basically the receptivity, and is really crucial for the embryo to implant. But much more and many more complex things are actually happening at the same time. There's actually a whole modulation of the maternal immune system and inflammatory response which is taking place because of progesterone at the same time, and this has everything to do also with the fact that half of the embryo is genetically foreign to the mother's body. Another factor which is quite important and has also been studied a lot is the role of progesterone as having an effect on the contractility of the uterus. So the uterine contractility has been linked to progesterone concentrations in the serum. It also has been linked to chances of implantation and pregnancy loss. So these things are all linked to that same hormone, progesterone. Now let's have a look at what we do in our daily practice. So we use progesterone, all of us, in many indications, but all in the luteal phase. And most of us, and this is data from a survey, do it with vaginal progesterone. Vaginal progesterone is still, especially in Europe, the most popular application for progesterone to our patients. Although other countries, especially like the US, IM progesterone is being used, but we also are using sometimes oral progesterone, and also more and more we start to use progesterone in combinations, where we're using different routes of progesterone for our patients in order to optimize the required progesterone for implantation. Now, we have been going through changes over time in the way how we do IVF, and one of them, the key changes, all thanks to more awareness of risks of ovarian hyperstimulation, and also because of the better cryopreservation methods we have thanks to vitrification, is the sharp increase of freeze-all cycles. So this means that more and more of our babies or more of our embryos are being transferred in cryocycles and no longer in fresh cycles. So more and more people are also focusing their research in how to optimize these cryocycles, because if we want to continue to increase the outcome for our patients, we need to focus there. And if you look at that, we need to look at progesterone. And that's what people have been doing. And so there's a plethora of studies where people have linked progesterone, and especially serum progesterone levels, to the outcome of these cryocycles. And as you can see, most of them are retrospective. Many of them are with rather small sample sizes. Most of them are done with vaginal progesterone. And most of them also surprisingly find or identify some kind of cutoff under which outcome seems to be poorer and above which outcome seems to be better in terms of ongoing pregnancy rates and in terms of miscarriage risks. So these are our findings that we've been confronted with in the last couple of years, and of course is something which is quite intriguing to us, because we weren't expecting serum progesterone to relate to that outcome, while we are thinking progesterone is actually acting in the uterus. But nevertheless, it's a fact that we've seen in many publications. And another striking thing is their variability with regard to the number of our patients that are being affected by these progesterone cutoffs. Some studies actually mention up to 85% of population in that particular study to be with too low progesterone, or not at least the ideal progesterone concentrations. There's a wide variation. That is also quite intriguing. How could this be? And lots of this has to do with the small sample sizes of the studies in which the population is cut in 4 groups, in quartiles or in centiles and deciles, and then randomly cutoffs are being created. So this makes many, many different cutoffs, and lots of questions about to real clinical guidance and precise cutoffs. And that's what I would like to discuss and go look into further in this talk. Now, what does explain that many of our patients have different serum progesterone concentrations? So if we measure them on the day of embryo transfer or the day before, as some do. First of all is the pharmacokinetics, as we have with any drug, as with any hormone. As women get older, with age, resorption gets better, thinner mucosa, and basically they do better in terms of serum progesterone concentration. The opposite we see with increasing weight. As in any other drug, as body weight increases, bigger distribution volume, lower progesterone levels. And a third one has been shown in this paper here is a history of low progesterone. Of course, they're more likely to have low progesterone measurements in subsequent cycles. As weight is related, BMI is also related, obviously. So this study, this is with IM progesterone. So women who are obese tend to have lower progesterone levels in their serum as women with normal weight or women with overweight, so without obesity. Another variable which is quite important for those of us who are measuring progesterone in the clinic is knowing that progesterone will, of course, decrease with time after administration, and also may have a circadian rhythm during the day. So depending on when your patients are being administered their progesterone, and depending on the time when you do your transfer, you may, and the time when you do your blood sampling, you may have different values. So we in our clinic, we had patients having progesterone vaginally in the morning and the evening, twice 400 milligrams, or some had 3 times a day, 200, 200, 200. If you do your transfer the same afternoon, same time, you will have different measurements. You would probably have different cutoffs. So this is important to realize. Another one is estradiol. We know estradiol induces progesterone receptors, signals to intravenous stimulation. That's why we need to give luteal phase support. The more estradiol, the more progesterone is needed. Now, from the data from Labarta, we've seen in proliferative phase patients with low progesterone on the day of transfer had lower proliferative phase estradiol. And if we talk about the luteal phase, there did not seems to be an association between the day of progesterone concentration and estradiol concentration. But what was seen in another paper was that ratio seems to be important. So those with a high ratio, meaning with high estrogen versus low progesterone, have lower pregnancy rate. So this is, in a way, a relation that has been seen. Sexual intercourse also plays a role. I mean, now in our center doing a study where people record their sexual activities in the 5 days before blastocyst transfer in order to see how this affects the progesterone levels. And as you could, of course, assume with vaginal progesterone, sexual intercourse will remove some of the progesterone, lowering serum progesterone concentration. While if you don't check the husband, the partner, then progesterone in his body, of course, tends to go up because basically he's taken that away from his partner. So this is another unexpected variable. And this brings us, of course, to the question, what can we do about it? So if we see that some of our patients, certain percentage, we don't know exactly how many are too low in progesterone, can we rescue them? Can we, at the day of transfer, give something more in order to give them the same chances as those with a progesterone value above the threshold? I'll go over some of them. For instance, the administration of IM progesterone could be an option in addition to already IM progesterone protocol, which is tested by Brady. Cutoff here was 20 nanograms per ml, which is higher than the classical 10 nanograms per ml, which was been seen in vaginal progesterone administration, but I come back to that. But here it's a higher threshold. People were given more IM progesterone, but that study did not see any difference in the outcome by increasing IM progesterone for those with a low progesterone level. So that doesn't seem to be efficient. Giving IM progesterone on top of PV, vaginal progesterone treated cycle, also did not seem to have the effect that they wanted. So it was 80 milligrams twice a day, vaginal progesterone, adding IM progesterone every third day, no difference. Pregnancy rates were exactly the same. Now, a strategy which has been more successful in uptake among clinics is the one where subcutaneous progesterone is being administered. Most of this is derived from studies from Elena Labarta, from the EVRMA group, where patients, and this is a cutoff that she identified in her patient population, 9.2 nanograms per ml, who were given vaginal progesterone 4 milligrams twice a day. These patients were given subcutaneous progesterone from day 4 in case they had progesterone levels under the threshold she identified. And then pregnancy rates were the same. Of course, this was not a randomized controlled trials and could be criticized for that, but of course there's historical data she had from her same clinic, similar population, and then corrected for all potential confounding variables, and then looking back before these additional injections, pregnancy rates were significantly lower. So in a way, she suggested a solution for those with a too low progesterone levels purely based on vaginal progesterone. Now, the question that comes up is, why don't we give all our patients much more progesterone? We give as maximum we can vaginally, we can give injections, and if everybody has the maximum amount of progesterone, then there will be very few with suboptimal concentration. But then the question comes up, could too much progesterone also be deleterious, or could it lower pregnancy rates as well? Here we go to the IM progesterone, data is conflicting. So one study shows like a continuous increase, a linear increase with outcome if progesterone levels increase. All the studies seem to show that it starts to decrease from a certain progesterone levels onward. You see this here, this blue line seems to go down. Missed abortion, biochemical pregnancy rates goes down. Also live birth rates tend to go down above a certain threshold. So this is conflicting. So what about vaginal progesterone? Is there something that plays? But first, before going there, I think it's also very important to know what the difference is between the vaginally administered progesterone and the one that's been administered through injections. We want our progesterone in the uterus because, like I said, there's secretory transformation, uterine contractility, and so forth, the immunological response. If we look at serum progesterone, we see that the serum progesterone increases much slower when it's given vaginally. So this is the blue one, the blue part on the left side. While giving it an injection, it tends to increase much faster. The complete opposite is what we see if we go into the uterus. Vaginal progesterone increases much higher and much faster progesterone levels in the uterus, in the endometrium, as compared to the intramuscular progesterone. So they have a complete different pattern of distribution in the body and location in the body, of course. Now we need to be aware of the fact that we measure it in the serum. So if we measure it in the serum, then of course subcutaneous administration will quickly give a high level in the serum, but at the same time in the uterus and the endometrium, progesterone levels may be low, and the opposite could be said from the vaginal administration. So this of course has a huge impact on these cutoffs that we look at. Now, if you look at the vaginal administration and you look at several studies, and I put here 3 studies that have been published in the last couple of years, you tend to see on first sight from a distance that is kind of bell-shaped effect of progesterone levels. So we see that the more progesterone they get in all 3 studies, the higher the pregnancy rates, but then there seems to be like a peak and then it seems to go down. Now, the 2 important remarks. The first one is only one out of these 3 studies, it seems to be significant. So this, the paper by Jovic and RBM Online showed a significant reduction in chances for those with a higher progesterone level. So in the 2 other studies, this was not significant. So basically does not exist. It's just something we assumed visually, but it's not there. Sample size may be too low. But on the other hand, what we also notice is that the progesterone levels in each of these bell-shaped curves are totally different. And so there's no consistency at what progesterone level it would go down, or whether there would be too much. So I think from these data we can't make up whether too much progesterone vaginally given would be harmful. Another thing that's important is that the progesterone being administered in the Jovic trial, where there was significance, was progesterone that was self-produced. It was not like the commercially available progesterone as has been used in the 2 other trials from Labarta and from Alsbeck. Another study that was indicating that progesterone could be too high comes from the study from Alsbeck. It's from the group from Peter Vermeiden from Denmark, where they have a quite innovative way to find a new route to administer progesterone to our patients, and it is a rectal way. So these patients were given both vaginal progesterone and rectal progesterone, and the cutoff was 8.8 nanogram per ml as to define people with too low progesterone. And the first note from this study was basically that discomfort from the rectal progesterone, which you could assume to be higher than vaginal, was not the case. So basically, on the 7-week scan, actually significantly fewer patients complaining of discomfort with the rectal administration as compared to the vaginal administration. The second thing that they've seen is that there appears to be a maximum cutoff. So there's 14.50 nanograms per ml cutoff, which is the 45 nanomolar per liter. People above tend to have, and it was significant, just 0.04 lower ongoing pregnancy rates with these rectal progesterone. So here it shows actually too much progesterone could be harmful. And so shown in one study with AIM, as I've shown, and the Jovic study with vaginal progesterone. So all 3 of them, there are indications that too much could be harmful. Now, going to another study, which is quite interesting, is a very recent one from Milo. Milo also, who wrote a meta-analysis showing that 10 nanogram per ml could be the cutoff. Of course, it was based on not that many trials, but another trial, which he performed later, he came up with a different cutoff. So there was a study with a very heterogeneous group of patients with natural cycles, frozen embryo transfer patients with HRT. It's 402 women were included in the study, and the lower cutoff was 7.8. So again, is a confirmation that this cutoff levels vary a lot, and it is so far one of the lowest cutoffs we've seen. So they tend to range from 7.8 to 10. And again, this was decided by the centile. So it's not a statistical cutoff, it's just basically randomly the lower 10% of the population that appears to be statistically significant. A second thing that he's seen, and I think this may be the most important finding from this study, is that there was a reduction in the mean probability of live birth in patients who were exclusively treated with subcutaneous progesterone. So here the cutoff level was 16.3. Remember, with the rectal, it was 14 nanograms per ml, above which lower pregnancy rates were seen. Here, with subcutaneous progesterone, 16 nanogram per ml as the cutoff, above which lower pregnancies were seen. You also looked at the risk of miscarriages. That did not seem to be significant, depending on progesterone levels. But there was a trend, as you can see here in the figure on the right, to higher miscarriages. But again, it was not statistical significant. So basically, we can't comment on this. This is also very interesting, comes from that same paper, where you can see, depending on the route at which you provide the progesterone to your patient in these frozen embryo transfer cycles, where you can see different ways progesterone concentrations in the serum relate to outcome. You see here in green is the natural progesterone, and then it basically you see the more progesterone, the better. Yeah. If you look at the micronized vaginal progesterone, more or less you see the same. The more progesterone you give to your patient, or the more, at least I should put it better, the more progesterone you measure in the blood, the better the outcome seems to be. And then, as what I just mentioned, the subcutaneous only patients without any vaginal progesterone, there seems to be a cutoff. And you see it's really bell-shaped. Those with progesterone above 16.3 nanogram/ml, you seem to have lower pregnancy rates. So there could be a risk in just giving the subcutaneous progesterone. For those with combined, and this could be any combinations, it was like a flat line. I don't know if you conclude much of that, because it's a very heterogeneous group of patients and treatments. Now, going to the fresh amber transfer cycle. So fresh amber transfer cycles, not that many studies have been performed, much less as in cryocycles. Progesterone also tends to be much lower, much higher in fresh amber transfer cycles, because we had this ovarian stimulation, we had many more estrogen, much more corporal lutea after the egg retrievals. So there's a much higher endogenous progesterone production, at least in the beginning, and then of course you need to supplement the luteal phase. And all what we consume, of course, is that the cutoffs will be different, and because of the higher estrogens, more progesterone will be needed to bind to all receptors. Study from Thompson, also from the group of Peter Homeiden, also found here in the patients where the early luteal phase progesterone was measured, a significance also with too much progesterone was harmful. Going back to the rescue strategies, we discussed rescue strategies with IM progesterone, with subcutaneous progesterone. Could we also rescue our cycle with giving more vaginal progesterone? Cédrin Durnerin from France has done a study. So she took the cutoff at 10 nanograms/ml, and patients were treated with 600 milligrams utrogestan a day, so 3 times 200, morning, lunchtime, evening. And then she increased the progesterone to 1200 milligrams a day for those where that our arbitrary set cutoff of 10 nanograms/ml was not reached. And then almost 70% of these patients, the next 2 days later, actually reached the 10 nanograms/ml. So basically that goal was reached. And then looking at pregnancy rates, you saw 20% pregnant in those above 10, 12 those below. This was not significant. Of course, sample size was way too small to find any difference here. Another study by Volofsky, which was originally presented as a retrospective cohort study, was quite interesting. And there was a letter written in response to that publication by Alsberg and other colleagues in the field, to comment on this paper. And in this study, people were given vaginal progesterone, and basically the study was just aimed to find a threshold. But it was retrospective, so there's always prone to bias. In that study, it was written in the discussion part, some patients were given additional vaginal progesterone, and that was not standardized. It was based on the discretion of the treating clinician, that he or she could give additional progesterone, and the cutoff there was 8 nanogram/ml. What they've seen in this study, which was basically interventional study, is that the threshold was come down from 10 or 8 or whatever we've seen before, 9.2 to 5 nanograms/ml. So basically, by modifying the amount of vaginal progesterone, by basically increasing it, the threshold has gone down. And this, of course, has huge clinical effect, because the number of patients with suboptimal progesterone levels decreased a lot, and because the percentage of patients under 5 nanogram/ml is significantly lower as percentage under 30. Under 30, it's about 30%. Under 5, it's less than 5% of patients have less than 5 nanogram per ml. I come back to that in the next slide. So basically, partial supplementation has a huge effect on determining the cutoff. And this is also confirmed from our own data. This is now under review. What we've done, we looked in our clinic retrospective to over 1,000 cycles of artificially prepared cycles, and so frozen embryo transfer cycles. So they were all given vaginal micronized progesterone, 800 milligrams a day, 400 morning, 400 in the evening, and we only supplemented the cycles with 5 nanogram per ml or less. And so all those above were not given any additional progesterone either vaginally or subcutaneously. And what we've seen is that progesterone did not seem to relate with outcome. So this basically seen that in our experience, the cutoff must be below 5 nanogram per ml, but was above, we saw no effect. And the consequence also was that only 3.9% of our patients needed to be supplemented with subcutaneous progesterone, which of course has a huge effect on our population, and also not only on the convenience of having fewer injections, and because you go from 30% to just under 4%, but also on the cost of the treatment. So what you can see on the right is the receiver operating curve. So after this policy of under 5 only subcutaneous progesterone, we no longer see any progesterone level where we could define a cutoff of lower outcome. Now, almost coming to the end to this part about the follicular, the luteal phase, and this is a very interesting study by Elena Labarthe also to have a better idea of how progesterone works. And so she was basically looking at the 3 pillars of progesterone. She looked at progesterone in the blood, progesterone in the endometrium and metabolites as well, and she looked at a marker for endometrial receptivity with which she used the error test, so gene expression in the endometrium, and looked how they related. The first thing that was interesting, but was already known from previous studies, is that the serum progesterone does not relate to the tissue progesterone. And this is quite intriguing because we're always focusing on that progesterone in the blood, while studies repeatedly show that what we measure in blood doesn't say anything about the concentration in the uterus. So this also need to make us think about the pathways and where that progesterone in the blood is actually making a difference on implantation and on maintenance of pregnancy, which is probably going to be immunological. The second thing is the relation between serum progesterone and the receptivity. So it's just assessed by the error test. There did not seem to be a relationship. So basically the serum, whatever progesterone you have in the blood, does not relate to whatever's happening in the uterus. Same thing as the previous thing has shown. The only correlation they've seen is that there's a correlation with what progesterone is giving, is available in the uterus, and what is the endometrial gene expression is doing, and is something, of course, which we already knew. So, in order to conclude, there's a direct effect in the uterus, directly enhancing embryo implantation. There's an indirect effect, and this is more systemic immunomodulation, not only during implantation, but also later in pregnancy. You have a potentially effect on preeclampsia and on preterm birth and so forth. Which is also interesting, and that also puts it into question with regard to the importance of progesterone in the uterus, is that actually studies have shown that very little progesterone is needed to have a secretory transformation in the uterus. Only 5 milligrams a day is necessary to have that transformation. Above that, doesn't matter, it's all changing. But of course, gene expression will continuously change with increasing progesterone, but just having the secretory transformation requires very little progesterone in the uterus. So I come back to that. Indirect effect is the systemic immunomodulation of pregnancy. Has been shown in many studies. Then finally, how about the natural cycle? Many studies have been done, and some are contradicting. This is data from the group from Police from Dexeus. They looked in PGTA cycles and non-PGTA cycles. Of course, PGTA cycles having higher implantation, but above all, both of these cycles, with or without PGTA, they were related to how much progesterone was measured in the blood on day of embryo transfer. So basically, this does not mean just going away from artificial cycles to the natural cycle will solve your progesterone problem. You will still need to supplement with progesterone. And that's also what's been confirmed now this year in Fertile Sterile. In the meta-analysis, they're looking at frozen embryo transfer cycles, natural cycles, with or without progesterone supplementation. Live birth rate significantly high with progesterone luteal phase in natural cycles. Clinical pregnancy rates, of course, as well. And miscarriage rates, it's not significant, but you can see the diamond is on the left side of the forest plot. It's on the side that favors progesterone. So this brings us to progesterone during ovarian stimulation. So it moves us from the second to the first part of our cycle. First, a word about late follicular progesterone rise is something we're all very much familiar with, and it is based on this beautiful paper, impactful paper from Kolibionakis from already over 20 years ago, where he has shown that an endometrium that is advanced because of ovarian stimulation for more than 3 days will no longer be able to receive or to have an embryo implanted, and so receptivity is lost. And so progesterone is the hormone of the luteal phase, shouldn't be too abundant in the follicular phase. That's quite clear. The same thing here, and that has its clinical implications. The 1.5 nanogram per ml threshold, nicely shown by this iconic graph by Ernesto Bosch, above 1.5 late follicular phase, day of triggering, lower pregnancy rates. So then freeze all. Now, but not going to detail the late follicular phase rise because we have the easy solution of the freeze all. There's another way that progesterone has a new important role in the follicular phase, and this has everything to do with the high exogenous progesterone effect. We can administer our patients with exogenous progesterone in the follicular phase during ovarian stimulation. And what does it do? You can see it here on the lower right side. It will prevent the LH surge. And this is because of the effect of progesterone on the GnRH pulse frequency. If the pulse frequency goes up, as you can see above on the slide, you will have LH FSH surge, you will have ovulation. If it's stable, nothing will happen. So this is basically the PPOS. This is the progestin or progesterone, which you could use as well. So there's not only progestins, the synthetic ones, progestin primed ovarian stimulation. A nicely described this paper by Barizata, where you can see where from day one, you start stimulation, you also start with progesterone. Progesterone every day, it's a pill, that's much cheaper. It's not painful as an injection of a GnRH antagonist, and also much cheaper for the patients. Of course, it's only be possible in the freeze-all cycles. But as I said, freeze-all cycles become, for most of us, the main thing we do. There are several progestins and also micronized progestin that has been tested. They all have the different doses that are needed to inhibit ovulation. And there's also, as you can see, a flexible PPOS protocol where you, as analog with the GnRH antagonist, start on day 6, or you could make it also flexible based on follicular size. So you have a shorter time of progesterone administration. Meta-analysis have already been performed comparing the outcome, because that's what counts, is how many eggs do we have, because it's freeze-all. Don't care about implantation. Number of oocytes is actually the same, or let's say it's not different. So same number of oocytes. Looking at pregnancy rates, of course, it will be from the cryocycle because it's PPOS. No difference. A live birth rate per woman, live birth rate per embryo transfer, no significance. And if you see the diamond is on the side of the PPOS, it's not on the side of the GnRH antagonists. And also for different patient populations, it's all feasible. If you're looking at the diminished ovarian reserve, or the poor responders as we call them, and normal ovarian responders, PCOS high responders, it works for all. So it's effective for all, and pregnancy rates are equal for all. So this is a very easy thing to do. And this is an abstract which I want to share with you, has been presented at ESHRE, Copenhagen last summer. And in that study, they compared flexible GnRH antagonist protocol versus PPOS. And that study, 20 milligrams of micronized progesterone was given. It was a prospective study. And we were on 2 cycles, one with PPOS, one with GnRH antagonist. We saw a significantly higher number of estradiol, LH, progesterone, of course, progesterone, and also more oocytes, more mature oocytes, and more zygotes, so more fertilized oocytes. But the number of blastocysts, euploid is the same. Of course, it would be quite spectacular to find a difference here with only 44 patients. Also, Antonio Lamarca has looked at this. This was done with progesterone, not with progesterone. Same percentage. He found the same thing. And then also the flexible one I mentioned before. You start on day 6. Same thing, no difference. Of course, this was a small study, retrospective study, but I know of centers, large centers, using these flexible protocols as we speak. So I'm pretty sure bigger data sets will come out confirming the deficiency of the late start PPOS, and so on day 6 start, or depending on follicular size. And then finally, we're coming to a close. A word on progesterone for ovulation triggering. And it's a bit contradictory because we've just been talking about progesterone to prevent LH surge and to prevent ovulation, but there we talked about high dose progesterone, especially for the progestins because they're very potent. But if you look at the normal cycle, the non-stimulated cycle, we see that prior to the LH surge, we see, of course, the estradiol increase of the growing follicle. We also see a small increase in progesterone, a small increase of endogenous progesterone, probably leaking from the maturing follicle. And that progesterone comes in circulation, and some way, potentially, it may also have its role in signaling to the pituitary, hey, I'm ready to ovulate, just let the LH go. Yeah? So it makes a lot of sense. Yeah? And it's been a couple of years ago a nice commentary for Till on this potential use of progesterone to trigger ovulation. And this paper also came out in JARC this year, where people were triggered with progesterone for ovulation. They were given IM progesterone, 5 or 10 milligrams progesterone intramuscularly, and led to ovulation just by giving progesterone. So I think this, of course, needs to be further explored and to see what this does to the endometrial receptivity, because, of course, if you give the progesterone 48 hours before ovulation, you have this premature secretory transformation that could, of course, lower implantation. So, but potentially, as in nature, if it's done in a very small amount, just enough to trigger ovulation, but not enough to change the receptivity, it could be something that we may be using more in the clinic in the future. So this brings me to my take-home messages before I invite you all to join in the discussion. First of all, progesterone, as you know, I don't think this is a no-brainer, has a crucial role throughout the whole of the pregnancy, basically from the second the embryo gets into the uterus for implantation until the baby is born. And every step, every day, it has its role in many different ways. The serum progesterone around the day of transfer seems to relate to treatment outcome. I think we can't deny this because all these studies seem to show some kind of relation, but that relation still is not very well understood because we can't draw uniform conclusions, in my opinion. Yeah? So there are conflicting data with regard to the cutoff. Of course, population studies are different. They go from 5 nanogram per ml, which I see in my clinic, my experience, up to people putting 10 nanogram per ml forward, and could be very well that somewhere in between. Potentially maximum cutoff could there be too, and the important one to notice is that subcutaneous progesterone alone actually had this cutoff, 16, the same we've seen for the rectal one, was 14 nanogram per ml. Progesterone has a unique role to play during the follicular phase. So the PPOS protocols getting more and more popular, especially for colleagues in Asia, quite impressed how often it's used there. And preliminary data about progesterone as an ovulation trigger are there too, but of course they need to be much more further explored. So I thank you for your attention, and I will stop sharing my screen now